$4.4 million Texans spent days in freezing temperatures without power or gas during the winter storm. Those widespread outages now blamed for many deaths across the state, and it has lawmakers vowing to find ways to keep what happened from ever happening again. Hearings at the Capitol uncovered more details about the power grid managed by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas that appeared destined to fail. But as Investigator Jody Barr found, changes made a decade ago kept the lights on in some parts of Texas outside the ERCOT grid.
Valentine's week found millions of Texans trying to survive a winter storm with no heat, gas, or electricity. But the people living in the largest city on the far west side of Texas didn't face those same extremes because of lessons learned a decade earlier. El Paso made big changes after the winter storm of 2011 when its power company lost all 8 generators in the freezing weather.
From El Paso Electric and all of its employees, this was personal.
Following that storm, El Paso Electric spent $4.5 million to winterize its power plants and was able to stay up and running last month when winter weather hit again.
We made a commitment in 2011 that we said we're never going to let this happen again, and our employees made the changes that were necessary.
So what's different about El Paso? Well, for starters, it's not part of the ERCOT grid, which covers most of the state. El Paso has its own power plants and is connected to the country's western grid. And it's one of the places that implemented the federal recommendations contained in this, a 357-page federal report from 2011 telling Texas then it should winterize its power grid. In fact, regulators used the word winterization 92 times in the report. Winterizing power plants could range from simply covering coal piles to adding heat strips to gas and water lines, to building wind barriers, adding insulation to air and water lines, and replacing liquids that might freeze with an antifreeze. Natural gas lines can be winterized too. The 2011 federal report also recommended wind barriers, adding heat strips to pipelines, injecting methanol into lines to keep liquids inside from freezing, and adding separators to get liquids that could freeze out of the lines.
Do you think that what happened in February is indicative that this truly indeed was not carried through?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it's almost as if nobody even gave a damn, you know, and certainly the folks at the PUC and ERCOT that had the ability to make the recommendations to the legislature at that time didn't do it.
And what are y'all doing on these spot checks?
Senator ROLAND Gutierrez filed a winterization mandate bill within hours of his back and forth with ERCOT CEO Bill Magnus at the Capitol last month.
What steps did ERCOT and the PUC take to ensure that energy providers have winterized and are prepared for extreme weather events?
It's something Gutierrez admits the legislature has failed to address since the 2011 storm. He was serving in the House back then. At least one bill a few sessions back died, but this year's emergency seems to have renewed urgency for reform.
We've got to make sure that it never, ever happens again. This winterization bill is an opportunity to be able to do that.
Only 41 of Texas's 254 counties have chosen not to be part of ERCOT, instead relying on their own power plants or co-ops and connecting to the nationwide power grids. ERCOT will gain another county when Lubbock joins its grid in June.
Does Lubbock have any hesitation at this point of joining ERCOT's grid?
Well, sure, we'd have hesitation. I mean, that we've for nearly 6 years been on a path towards ERCOT because of the affordable, safe, and what we believe was reliable grid.
Lubbock started down its path to ERCOT about 5 years ago. With its own power plants, Lubbock didn't report any prolonged outages last month, only brief, rolling ones.
If Lubbock were part of the ERCOT grid on February 14th, this storm could have been a much different story for your city.
I think that's a fair statement.
Well, there is no federal requirement for any power utility to winterize for now, but that could soon change. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation's looking at adopting winterization standards in those major national power grids. But Josh, even if those weatherization standards pass, they likely would not apply to the power grid here in Texas.
All right, Jody, thank you very much. We've already seen major changes to the management of Texas Power Grid. Since the storm, ERCOT's lost half of its board to resignations. The remaining board members fired CEO Bill Magnus, and 2 of the 3 members of the Public Utility Commission stepped down. Chair Deanne Walker resigned on March 1st. Commissioner Shelley Botkin resigned this past Monday. The remaining member on the commission got grilled by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick during a Senate committee hearing.
The first principle of all of this is do what is right. And the right thing is to correct an error and a mistake.
The exchange with PUC Chair Arthur DeAndrea was unusual. Patrick said it was just the second time he'd participated in a hearing as Lieutenant Governor. Senators want the PUC to retroactively lower electricity prices charged in the days after the winter storm. Industry watchdogs told lawmakers ERCOT overcharged power companies. They called for a price correction of close to $5 billion. DeAndrea testified that he cannot legally change market prices after the fact. The Lieutenant Governor disagreed.
And I don't think the governor would ask you to do anything illegal, but he would not have asked for us to have this hearing to look at incorrect billing if he thought it was illegal, because it would have been no point to have all these hearings if at the end of it, the evidence was that it was a mistake, that it was an error, and at the end there wasn't anything you could do about it.
You can act. You're the legislature. I can't act. I'm a bureaucrat. You get all sorts of things done that I can't do.
Governor Abbott made the correction of billing errors related to ERCOT an emergency item for lawmakers. Energy experts say no matter what legislators decide to do, there will be winners and losers among utilities and their customers. Texas expands the list of who's eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine, but how does our list compare to other states? A closer look next on State of Texas.